Knock at midnight. Hung is a senior student, living alone in an old apartment building in the suburbs. The room is small, cheap but quiet, suitable for studying and writing a graduation thesis. Since moving here, he always felt something strange, but because he was busy studying, he didn't pay much attention. Until one night. Hung sat doing homework until late at night. While he was concentrating on his laptop screen, he suddenly heard a knock on the door. Knock, knock, knock. He looked at the clock in surprise. It was almost 1 a.m. Who would come at this hour? Hung hesitated, but then got up and opened the door. There was no one in the hallway. The apartment hallway was long and narrow, the yellow lights flickering weakly. In the distance, a few neighbors' doors were tightly closed, silent. Hung frowned, thinking he might have misheard, then closed the door and continued working. But only about 5 minutes later, the knocking sound came again. Knock, knock, knock. This time, Hung felt something was wrong. He decided to look through the peephole before opening the door. However, there was no one outside the door. He felt a chill down his spine. Could it be someone's prank? But who would have the patience to tease him at this time of night? Hung shook his head, reassuring himself that he might be hallucinating because he was too nervous. He returned to his desk and continued working. Time passed slowly. At around 2 a.m., when he was about to go to sleep, the knocking sound came again. Knock, knock, knock. This time, it was not as gentle as before, but more urgent, louder, and more urgent. Hung's heart was pounding. He slowly approached the door, his eyes glued to the magic eye. There was still no one outside. But he suddenly realized something terrible. Although there was no one in the hallway, the shadow of someone was still imprinted under the pale yellow light. The shadow stood right in front of his room door. There was clearly something invisible there. A cold feeling ran down his spine. Hung stepped back, not daring to breathe heavily. He quickly locked the door, turned off all the lights, covered his head with the blanket, trying not to think about what had just happened. After a long while, the knocking gradually disappeared. The next morning, Hung told this story to the apartment security guard. After listening, the guard sighed, his eyes seemed thoughtful. I'm new here, so I don't know yet. There was a girl living in the room I rented before. One night, the neighbors heard her screaming, followed by a knock on the door asking for help. But when they ran out to see, it was too late. That girl was murdered right in the room. From then on, people would occasionally hear knocking on the door in the middle of the night. Hung's heart pounded. He didn't believe in ghosts, but what he had experienced last night was hard to explain. That night, he decided to stay up late one more time, to see if the knocking would come back. Sure enough, it was exactly 1 a.m. Knock, knock, knock. This time, instead of being afraid, Hung mustered up all his courage and approached the door. Who is it? There was no answer. He slowly looked through the magic eye. Still no one. But the shadow on the floor was still there. Then, unexpectedly, the shadow slowly moved. Not far away. But it looked up, looking straight into the magic eye. Although he couldn't see clearly, Hung could feel the cold gaze from the other side of the door. He panicked and backed away, his heart pounding wildly. The knocking sounded again. Knock, knock, knock. Then, a soft voice said, "Open the door for me." Hung shouted, rushed to bed, and covered himself with the blanket. He didn't know when he fell asleep, but when he woke up, the sun was already high in the sky. He hurriedly packed his things, deciding to leave the apartment immediately. Before leaving, he turned back to look at his door one last time. Outside, on the wooden door, there was a handprint imprinted, as if someone had been touching it all night.